All right, we're going to call to order Admin and Finance Committee. Can I get a roll call, please?
Okay. Dr. Bophy? Present. Dr. Bophy is present. Mr. Davis?
Present.
Mr. Davis is present. Ms. Edmonston? Present. Ms. Edmonston is present. Mr. Garvey? Here. Mr. Garvey is present. Ms. Holloway? Here. Ms. Holloway is present. Dr. Jones?
Present.
Dr. Jones is present. Ms. Lewis? Ms. Lewis is present. Ms. Orange Jones? Present. Ms. Orange Jones is present. Mr. Rock? Present. Mr. Rock is present. Dr. Thomason?
Present.
Dr. Thomason is present. Ms. Vautier? Here. Ms. Vautier is present. You have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. First item of business, please.
Your consent agenda is ready for approval, adding items 5.1 and 7.1. On item 3.1, the Exec Rec was revised on August 14th, and a handout reflecting that update has been distributed. Recommendation is to receive.
Can I have a motion for that, please? Dr. Bophy, any a second? Dr. Thomason? Do I have any objection to that? No objection. Consent item is approved. Next, please.
The first item is on page 33, item 4.1. Consideration of federal state grants and allocations to LEAs, Type 2 charters, Type 5 charters, approved non-public schools, and community-based organizations. Recommendation is to approve.
Motion is approved. Can I get a motion? Dr. Rock? I'm sorry, Tom Rock. And Garvey, second. Any, I have some comment cards. Let's go with our public comment cards, and then I'll bring to the board if we have any questions from that point. Could I have Lee Barrios and Jean Putnam, please? Please come to the front. Is Jean here? May not be. Ms. Barrios, go ahead, please.
Okay. Lee Barrios, retired teacher from St. Tammany. I would ask that BESE look a little more closely at the grant that's being proposed for collegiate academies. Several issues with that. The Lens just recently published a story about administrator for collegiate who is a convicted felon, again, Dr. Jones, who has been given the job of administrator of outreach for collegiate at a $96,000 salary. When the Lens asked for documentation or report, or did she file in her application that she was a convicted felon, the school said that they were aware that she was, but that the state police report was in her personnel file and therefore it was not public information. So that's a little bit of a glitch to our, transparency issue. Also, the new principal at Collegiate Baton Rouge, I understand, that just opened this year, has an alternate certification that expired in 2014. And so I'm just wondering what this particular group has to offer that would qualify them for this grant. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the speaker, if I could. Are you saying that convicted felons should never work in our schools?
No, what I'm saying is that you're offering up a grant to this set of schools, Collegiate Academy, and that there are some questions. The Lens published the report that nobody knew that this lady had been hired by Collegiate. She was let go previously because she was convicted of a felony.
She was let go by Collegiate previously?
By whoever she worked for before. She evidently was in the system, I think.
Okay.
Her mother actually went to jail. She was part of that. But and then that there are so many unqualified people running the system. Even the principal of the collegiate that opened here, my understanding is, and I looked up her, I'm not going to name her or anything, but she doesn't have an active certification. And we're talking about special needs kids that they're serving, and this grant is for special needs.
But this lady is doing public outreach, I think. You're saying she's unqualified for the public outreach job?
No, I'm saying that she has been hired by a charter school, which they're evidently, according to the law, they're allowed to do that, and yet she's a convicted felon. So
And
what
yet-
else, I'm asking you all, I think you should look a little bit more into this system of schools to see what's going on here. If you're giving them money and this is for special needs, to serve special needs kids. And I think Collegiate has only had schools here, if I'm correct, for maybe 3 years in New Orleans. Not sure, how many years is that?
But you're saying you don't think we should give grants to schools
I'm
that
saying-
have ex
I'm
felons as
suggesting that you
employees?
look into the background of the people that run the schools and that work in the school. If you're going to give them a grant, that, in my understanding of these grants, is to provide examples of what can be done for special needs kids when they leave high school. That's all that I'm saying. It put up a red flag for me, it put up a red flag for the Lens, and so I'm just asking BESE, making you aware of that in case you weren't aware of that.
And do you know what this lady was convicted of?
Yes?
What was it?
Do you really want me to go into all that? I'll send you the Lens
Well-
article. Her mother, I think, was Elnise Brooks Sims, and it was all the corruption in the Orleans Parish school system, was selling items and taking money, and she actually put money that her mother had expropriated, whatever. She provided a bank account for that.
I think we're getting a little deeper than we need to get at this point. So let's bring it back around to the topic at hand. Thank you, Mr. Garvey. Dr. Jones, you have a question?
Which grant are we talking about on here? I'm trying to.
This is the IDEA Opportunity Grant. It's a grant to help students that have the most significant cognitive disabilities find an adequate transition to employment. I'm certainly happy to talk about the merits of any of this, but these are partnerships between community colleges, employment agencies, and school systems to help students who are generally classified as Law 1 transition into work.
Mr.
Does that answer your question, Dr. Jones?
Yeah, I think so. Collegiate Academy is the one we're.
One of them, yes.
One of them.
One of 5, yeah.
Mr. Garvey?
Yes, Superintendent. Do we give grants to regular public school systems?
We do.
Do we ask them for a list of all of their formerly convicted felons
No.
who have served their probation, finished their probation, and have moved on back into a job?
We don't ask for that.
Okay, thank you.
This is last call for Gene Putnam. All right. Board members, are there any other comments? Ms. Edmonston?
Yeah, Mr. Davis, thank you. I think we covered this a lot already this morning, and I think that we have plans to look into backgrounds of people that are not only in regular traditional schools, but in charters as well. So, Ms. Barrios, I know this is a concern, and it's a concern that's been brought up before, so
Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate her letting us take note of that.
Dr. Thomason?
I just had a comment that I wanted to make. I wanted, when you get ready to call for the vote, item 4.1 that relates to
Can't
the...
hear you.
Make sure you close that mic.
Okay, I can talk a lot louder. But item 4.1 that relate to the teacher preparation transition support program for Grambling State University, I would like to be recused from that item.
Let the records note that, please. Are there any recusals that should be noted at this time?
Yeah.
Ms. Vaucher, Ms. Lewis? Are you?
Item 4.1, the opportunity grant and the AP test fee reimbursement.
Okay. Ms. Holloway?
The McKinsey Vento and the AP test.
Right. Ms. Edmondson, did you raise your hand?
AP test fee reimbursement, please.
Okay.
Recuse
And
myself.
Ms. Lewis, did you have some?
4.1 Teacher Preparation Transition Support Program.
Thank you. The minutes reflect that, notes reflect that. Do we have any other comments from the board? If there are no other comments, do we have any opposition? Hearing no opposition, motion carries. I'm sorry.
Just one particular item in this grant?
I have.
You have? Okay, that's okay.
What we can reconcile? Okay, good deal. Dr. Jones?
I'd like to ask for a moment of privilege.
Certainly.
I think we have a very important announcement that needs to be made, and I turn the chair to the superintendent.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jones. I just received an email that Louisiana's ESSA plan has been approved by the federal government.
One of the first in the country.
Third or fourth?
Yes, it is.
Good.
Thank you very much. I'll keep you apprised as the process goes forward.
First in the country?
No, I believe it's the fifth.
One of the
fifth,
fifth.
the fifth, yeah, the fifth, yeah.
Great. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that announcement. What's our next item of business, please?
On page 50, item 4.2, consideration of LDE contracts over 50,000. Recommendation is to approve.
Need a motion from the board? Mr. Garvey moves. I need a second. Second. Dr. Bovee? Do I have comments? We'll go to comment cards and we'll come back to the board. Ms. Lee Barrios and Ms. Pam Carey, please.
Lee Barrios, St. Tammany. Again, another simple request that relates to transparency, accessibility, for stakeholder input, and all that. I just learned this morning when I spoke to Shan, I pointed out to Shan that when I pulled up all these contracts, they were blank forms. And this is the first time that I've had the problem, number one, and secondly, that I was, that I understood that you can't access this stuff on an iPad or an iPhone. It has to be a computer. So I would ask that the department do something about that. I mean, gosh, this is the 21st century, and I don't understand how an iPad, which most people, a lot of people use when they come here in their phones, can't access these contracts. So I couldn't be prepared for these contracts. Thank you.
Duly noted. Thank you, Ms. Barrios. Ms. Carey?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Pam Carey, and I am the gumbo coordinator for the state, and I'm housed at Families Helping Families at the Crossroads, who holds the gumbo contract right now until October 31st, 2017. I am not here today to talk about me or to talk about Families Helping Families. I'm here today to urge you to possibly find some kind of way to keep the gumbo program connected to the State Department of Education. It has been, I know you all have received numerous letters of support for the program, so I'm not going to go through any of that. It's a well-known program. It's a well-run program. The original gumbo program was developed by the State Department of Education, Office of Special Education, in 1986, and it was there to fulfill a need that was not being met, and that need was to provide children with physical or visual disabilities the opportunity to participate in extracurricular sports activities. And this sports program is educationally based, and it's to develop the child to his or her fullest potential. All children that participate in sports programs learn the correct way of performing a skill. They learn how to use equipment. They learn how to condition the body. They learn how to compete. There's a lot of learning that goes along with a sports program that's done correctly. Some of the students that benefit from the gumbo program may have impairments such as cerebral palsy, spina bifida, muscular dystrophy, spinal cord injury, dwarfism, arthrogryposis. Many will have amputations, and many that have blindness and visual impairments, and that's just to name a few of the impairments of the children that come through this program. So I realize that that a grant or a contract is not available this year. It was not put up on the board to be voted on. I do realize that, and I thank you for extending the contract at least till October 31st. But I am asking if there is any other way to keep the gumbo program going and keep it connected with the State Department of Education, such as, and just off the top of my head, like having a qualified statewide facilitator that will continue the integrity and the legacy of the gumbo program, housed at one of your schools or housed at a regional center or possibly even housed at a university. I don't know if that's a possibility, but I'm just asking if that could be a consideration. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Carey. Appreciate your input on that, your thoughts. Do I have any other public comment cards from the board? All right. Any objections to the motion? Do you have an objection, Ms. Edmondson?
I have a question. Can I ask Superintendent a question?
I'm sure you can. Superintendent White, please.
John, is there a way that what she's suggesting could be done. We've gotten a lot of letters about gumbo in particular.
Yeah.
I think Families Helping Families issue is pretty much resolved, and maybe everybody's not real happy about it, but that's done. But this is a unique program, and it's come to my attention that around the country, people are looking to our program. Is there a way we could maybe negotiate what she's talking about?
So to the question, and ma'am, we will make sure that you're briefed if you haven't been briefed. We have extended the grant through the end of October, so
Right.
there's a transition period. We also have allocated funding to the special school district, which oversees the services of students not just in the 3 schools, but also to students statewide with low incidence disabilities, in particular with orthopedic impairments and sensory impairments. That district, given resources that are less than what was given before because it already gets a significant amount of state funding to do its work, will be learning from Gumbo and will be trying to incorporate some of the lessons learned from Gumbo into a program of games statewide as well that aspires to the same level of scale and excellence that Gumbo achieved. And Jamie, who would be here today, except
Right.
that she just had a child, she will be facilitating discussions between Gumbo and the special school district so that if there is the ability to share resources or to ask the Families Helping Families in Central Louisiana to assist with some of the process, we will be doing that as well. We don't want to get rid of the games as the issue. We want to make it so there's a more stable funding stream when it's not going to be a no-bid contract every year from IDEA.
Is that going to be using existing staff from the special school district?
It will, although we made a $25,000 allocation to the special school district for this purpose for startup funding so they can make the transition themselves during the period that we're working with Families Helping Families of Central Louisiana.
Okay.
Thank you for the questions. Thank you, Superintendent. Any other comments on the board? Any objection to the motion? Hearing no objection, motion carries. Next item of business, please.
On page 83, item 4.3, consideration of the special school district budget. Recommendation is to receive.
Dr. Bophy, I need a second. Ms. Holloway? Any questions or comments from the board? Any public comment cards? No? Any objections to the I'm sorry, Ms. Lewis?
The only, maybe I can this can just be like a follow-up email. It's just a general question about the breakdown at each of the schools and how much is allocated to each of the special schools. If we can just get a breakout of that, because we have been getting emails and concerns about the budgets at each of the schools in the special district.
So to be clear, to get a breakdown to the board of the different schools within that budget context?
Yes.
Noted.
So Mr. Burke and his team can make sure that we get a breakdown of each school's individual staffing and budgeting.
Thank you. Dr. Jones, you had a question?
Yeah, it's a general one. I note that there's about a $200,000 decrease from last year's budget. Is that a result of the budget cuts statewide?
Yeah, that's a general fund reduction. Yeah, that's not an IDEA reduction. It's a general fund, and they've been taking those reductions pretty much every year, certainly since I've been here.
Any other comments on the board? Any objections to the motion? No objections. Motion is received. To receive is passed. Next item, please.
On page 118, item 5.2, consideration of RSD contracts and leases of $50,000 and over. The recommendation is to approve.
I need a motion from the board. Dr. Bophy, I need a second. Mr. Rock, thank you so much. I do have a comment card. We'll hear the comments, and then we'll go into board discussion. Ms. Lee Barrios.
It's the same problem, could not access it.
Duly noted. Any comments or questions from the board?
Members, just a quick note. We're going to be talking a little bit later about the RSD, and we talked yesterday. I do want to just continue for you to note that these contracts are going to continue to come to you. You'll notice they're getting increasingly small, but they're going to continue to come to you as your term proceeds, because the state will continue to oversee the FEMA-funded implementation of the renovation of schools in New Orleans. So this will continue on a meeting-by-meeting basis.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any other questions or comments from the board? Any objection? No objection, motion carries. Next item, please.
On page 135, item 6.1, consideration of 8G funding cycle activities. Approval of 8G statewide programs for fiscal year 2017-2018. The recommendation is to approve.
Mr. Rock motions. Ms. Holloway seconds. Do I have any comment cards? No comment cards. Any discussion or questions from the board? Any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item, please.
On page 143, item 8.1, consideration of an update report regarding the RSD. There are two recommendations. A, approve the RSD budget, and B, receive the report regarding the RSD transition plan.
Can I get a motion for that? Dr. Bofi, and I need a second. Mr. Rock, thank you for that. I do have a public comment card, which we'll hear first, and then we'll go into the presentation. Any questions, okay? I think I have a comment card. Ms. Barrios, same issue or something different?
It might be useful to do the presentation.
This is 8.1. Do you want us to do the presentation first? Is it maybe? Okay, thank you, ma'am. Superintendent?
Let me just frame it, and then I'll ask Assistant Superintendent CEO Narachania to answer the question, or to provide the presentation. I was asked to present on a number of organizational issues related to the RSD. A, their budget is up for the district, and second, you had asked kind of what the status of unification and leadership is in the district. So we wanted to give you a presentation, and we will, just describing where we are now, in particular with the unification in New Orleans, and what that means for the future. And the reason this is particularly timely is that you are not going to see a budget like the one you see this year next year. This district is going to look very different next year, as we discussed at our retreat. And so this is an update on that question, a chance to review this year's budget, and also a chance for you to ask questions about the future of the district leadership, and so on as well. So with that, Kunjan will walk us through the document.
Great. Good afternoon, BESE members. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the history of the RSD and the future direction of the RSD. As you all well know, the RSD was created in law in 2003 and allows this board to intervene in the lowest performing schools in the state. At that time, in 2003, in Orleans, 54% of students were graduating, and 62% of students were attending a failing school. And immediately subsequent to the passage of that law in 2004 and 2005, the RSD began intervention in schools by taking over 5 chronically failing schools in Orleans. After Hurricane Katrina, in an effort to ensure that all kids who were returning to Orleans had a place to go to school, the state legislature asked that the Recovery School District take responsibility for 107 school buildings into the Recovery School District. The RSD then direct ran schools and chartered schools within those buildings between the years 2005 and up to present day. In 2014, we chartered the last of the direct run Recovery School District schools, and 2 years subsequent to that, in 2016, the RSD and OPSB together partnered to pass legislation to ensure the unification of the 2 school systems that have existed in Orleans. In the time that the Recovery School District has governed the majority of the schools within the parish, we have performed the core functions of oversight and management of the charter schools and the direct run schools while we had them. That includes authorizing and overseeing schools by expanding successful schools and closing struggling schools. We have operated the student enrollment process for 90% of the schools in the system, and we also have managed the student expulsion process and ensured that all students were given due process in the event that their school was recommending them for expulsion. As you have heard at Committee of the Whole meetings, we have launched and overseen programs that support the most vulnerable kids, including the Youth Opportunity Center, the Therapeutic Day Program, and most recently the behavioral health pilots that you heard about at the last Committee of the Whole. And as John mentioned, we are rebuilding the schools within the city, and we have, thanks to Lona Hankins, who's in the audience, and her team, have gotten very close to using the entirety of the $2 billion we've been granted to rebuild school buildings in our city. The state intervention in New Orleans has led to strong results. And as I mentioned, in 2005, 62% of students attended a failing school. In 2016, 88% of students are attending a non-failing school, with 66% of students attending an A, B, or C school. And that change has happened within 11 years in our city. You can see progress also within the grad rate and in the college-going rate of our students. The graduation rate, as I mentioned, in 2004 was 54%, and we are at 72.1%. Our graduation rate for economically disadvantaged students and students with disabilities in New Orleans exceeds the state average. And the percent of students attending college after high school is 63%, also exceeding the state average. And as I mentioned, and as you all know, last year, the Orleans Parish School Board, the Recovery School District, and local legislators, as well as yourselves, partnered together to pass Act 91, which governs the unification of the Recovery School District with the Orleans Parish School Board. That law was crafted in strong partnership with our schools as well, and the sort of core tenets of that law include strengthening the charter authorizing process by ensuring that the district is focused on authorizing high-quality schools, closing low-performing schools, and expanding those that have been successful with students. Ensuring parent choice through our Enroll, NOLA, and One App process. Ensuring fair funding such that the schools that are taking on the hardest to serve kids are funded fairly for those students and for their particular needs. And for ensuring a responsible unification. A unification advisory board made up of local leaders and school leaders oversees the entirety of the unification. That group convenes quarterly and hears updates and advises the superintendent and myself on the progress being made towards unification. So as Superintendent White suggested, a year from now, the Recovery School District will not govern the schools that it currently has under its oversight that are Type 5 charters. The state will still oversee the Type 2 charters, but the RSD will not oversee the Type 5 charters in New Orleans. We, however, do still oversee Type 5 schools in Baton Rouge. And in East Baton Rouge, we have 27 schools that have been a D or an F for 3 consecutive years. Within those schools, we have 11,500 students, and the grad rate in this city is at a 67.8%. We have several schools in Baton Rouge. We have 8 Type 5 schools and 8 Type 2 charter schools that are overseen by the state, and we will continue to provide oversight of those charter schools. We will support the expansion of strong schools, and we will continue to close low-performing schools. The RSD also has a role under the new ESSA law. And as you all know, ESSA requires the state to list the schools that are chronically struggling within our state and requires those schools to build a plan for improvement. For schools that continue to struggle, the RSD does have the opportunity to intervene. And in Caddo Parish, we've been in discussions with Superintendent Gorey in partnership with Mr. Davis around their schools that have been struggling and are RSD eligible. As we talked about interventions for those particular schools, the local superintendent, Dr. Gorey, decided that he wanted to create, in partnership with us, a zone, the Transformation Next zone. That zone includes more than the schools that are RSD eligible, which we are in support of. and the zone essentially allows for one leader to be responsible for the improvement of all of the schools within that leader's jurisdiction. Additionally, principals benefit from increased autonomy over curriculum, school day, and school year. Teachers have the benefit of increased pay for working in some of the most challenged schools in the city. All schools are participating in the TAP program, and an advisory board of civic leaders and community leaders advises the local superintendent and the state superintendent on the progress within those schools. That is just one example of how the RSD can support districts as they think about how to improve their most struggling schools. And, we look forward to working with additional districts in this same way, and we look forward to your partnership as we consider how to address our state's most struggling schools. So thank you, and I invite questions.
Thank you very much. Do I have any questions from the board? Easy enough. And back to Ms. Barris, I do have a public card for you. Do you have a question relative to this matter, or was it subject to the technology you had earlier? Okay. Okay, if it's about this topic, come on down.
Lee Barrios, St. Tammany. My first comment is really quickly. I just wanted to point out for the public that the statistics shown were not for the RSD. They were for the New Orleans citywide schools, which includes New Orleans public school system. That's been an ongoing problem when trying to convey to the public what is going on, what was going on with the RSD, and what continues to go on. So, secondly, I believe, Mr. Jones, that you told me that this particular agenda item would address concerns about the appointment of Ms. Narachania as the superintendent. May I speak to that now?
You'll have to ask your chair there.
Actually, that's not relative to this topic. I don't believe it's not within this item.
Well, Mr. Davis, respectfully, there may be.
Is it the time of this?
It may end up being because I believe the superintendent.
I'm happy to provide information on the leadership of the district, if that would be.
That may address the question then.
Okay. I sent a letter to Dr. Jones recently per BESE regulations that I believe was forwarded to all board members by Ms. Davis. What that said is that I gave a status update on 3 things. First, that Superintendent Dobard had resigned his position. Secondly, that in his place, and I believe the letter is being passed out if you don't have your electronic copy on hand, that in his place I was not going to make appointments for a new superintendent for reasons that I'll get to in a minute, and that I have instead appointed a chief executive officer for the Baton Rouge Achievement Zone and a chief executive officer for the Recovery School District statewide. I am not appointing a district superintendent. In a previous announcement, I did use that terminology. Upon reconsideration, it is a chief executive officer in those 2 positions and not replacing the Superintendent Dobard. Why not? Because of what Ms. Narachania just presented, there really won't be schools in the Recovery School District anymore. And there's nothing in state law that requires that there be a superintendent of a district in the RSD. Therefore, my last recommendation in the letter that I sent to President Jones was that you reconsider the rules that you have in BESE Bulletin regarding the administration of the Recovery School District. Those rules were written in the time immediately post-Hurricane Katrina, most of them, when, as Ms. Narachania said, this district had more than 100 schools in it. It was run, as she said, very much like a traditional school system. It's not that anymore. And there doesn't need to be rules about the RSD having to have a superintendent and so on. The legislature does not require it. I don't believe you should require it. And so as you make that consideration, I am going to use my authorities to have a chief executive appointment in Baton Rouge and a chief executive appointment in New Orleans and statewide. That's the status of the leadership. I hope it's satisfactory. It does comply with all rules and regulations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Superintendent. Dr. Jones, you have something to add?
Yeah, I'd like just to add a little bit to that. The question obviously came up as a result of a previous statement that would be the position. And if you look at the BESE rule, it requires that if he had named a superintendent, that we would have had to approve that. I seriously doubt there would have been a problem with it. But nonetheless, what he has done here is he has given additional duties to 2 of existing staff. These are not new positions. He has just consolidated the remaining duties of the CEO for New Orleans to, and I never can say her last name, but I'll just say Ms. Kunjan, and also to Mr. Peterson. So, my interpretation of that is that it is within his abilities as superintendent to delegate duties to his staff as he sees fit, and that by him taking that action, it does not require a BESE action.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. I believe that addressed that part of your question, Mr. Barrios. Do you have any other questions related to this item?
I just have a statement to make,
Certainly.
testimony, because I understand you don't answer questions. So I want to go on the record as pointing out that this is just another example of the spin that's put on these types of things. Ms. Narachania has been published as the superintendent of the RSD for months now. I filed several public information requests to get applications, resumes, work history, qualifications. Never in those responses, for which I was not provided any, did anybody say that, oh, that was an error, that Ms. Narachani had not been appointed as the superintendent. Dr. Jones was on the impression that BESE had dropped the ball on this in not approving it according to state law. And this is a way to get around, in my opinion, to get around having someone do the job of a superintendent RSD who is not qualified to do that, which Ms. Narachani is not qualified. She was also published on the Chiefs for Change website as being the new recovery school superintendent. So I object to that. It's another example of lack of transparency and trying to get around the rules and the laws. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barrios. Do I have any more questions or comments from the board? Dr. Jones.
I'd just like to follow up with that regardless of what may have been put there or so forth, when it was brought to my attention, I contacted Superintendent White and we discussed the issue, and basically it came down to he had to make a decision. The decision being whether or not he wanted to name someone superintendent or whether or not he wanted to handle that inside his existing staff. Save the state money by doing it the way he did it. I'm happy with it. But, I made it clear in the discussion with Superintendent White that there could be no reference to the title of superintendent for either one of those 2 positions involved. And if there's been any previous representation to it, it was an error. And I admit I dropped the ball because I didn't catch it at the time when it came out there that BESE needed to approve it. I was under the impression when we first saw it that was entirely within his authority in the first place. But as I researched it, I presented him with the idea or the fact that if he wanted to name a superintendent, and we also discussed the fact that there were no educational duties involved with this in this current situation, so there was no need for a superintendent. So once again, I'll accept responsibility if the ball was dropped. But I also say that he is within his authority to delegate those duties to people who are on his existing staff.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. The motion in front of us is to approve the budget and receive the report. Do I have any objections to that? With no objections, motion carries. What's our next item of business?
That concludes the agenda.
Thank you very much.